Let's jump into our first session of the day. I am super excited to welcome up Chris Albin, Director of Machine Learning at Wikimedia, to the TWiML virtual stage to help me get today kicked off. Welcome, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. This is a stage. It looks a lot like my living room, but you know, that works too.
It's all virtual. It's all virtual. So why don't we get started by having you share a little bit about your background? So you are, of course, the Director of Machine Learning at Wikimedia, but folks know you as the guy that posts those cool data science flashcards on Twitter, and you've also written a book. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, yeah. I received my PhD in quantitative political science, so a lot of like formal training in statistics. And immediately afterwards, I actually joined two Kenyan humanitarian nonprofits that was doing humanitarian tech work. And so there was a lot of emphasis there, less on understanding the causal relationship and more about having impact. Like, how can we make this, how can we actually like predict if something's gonna like take place, or how can we actually translate text and all that kind of stuff. And along those lines, that's where really for me, the opportunity of machine learning came in. And my training wasn't in that. And so I spent a huge amount of time sort of taking that statistical training and then moving it over to the machine learning space over the years of one nonprofit, then another one, then my own startup, then another Kenyan nonprofit, and then healthcare startup, and then like finally now at the Wikimedia Foundation. But things like the flashcards come out because I'm very open about that I'm trying to learn. I don't think this is the fields where, after a certain level of seniority, you just stop learning. I think this is the field that you're always trying to learn the next thing, always trying to like find the next tutorial or next video or next technology. I think it keeps you agile, which is frankly the reason I stay in the field.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about Wikimedia and the ways that Wikimedia uses machine learning.
Sure. So yeah, I work for the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the foundation that helps host Wikipedia. And I'm being very careful with that wording because Wikipedia is a community encyclopedia. I am not writing individual articles. I'm not saying how individual edits, despite what my parents think, I'm not responsible for every single edit that happens. Instead, I'm building the tooling to actually serve that up to folks. And a lot of the work that we do on the machine learning team revolves around the idea of editor efficiency, collaboration, and quality of the content. So along those lines, like we have models that help editors look at, say, edits that might be worth taking a look at. So for example, an edit that might be unproductive, or an edit that might be damaging, or an edit that might be disinformation. We will actually tag that for people, which you can actually see in many versions of many communities of Wikipedia, including English Wikipedia. If you go to the recent changes, you can see our models in action. They're called Oars Models, O-R-E-S. And you actually see in the recent changes our model tagging the edits and saying, hey, this one looks normal, this one looks a little bit weird, you might want to take a look at this, and that kind of stuff, in order to provide all of our wonderful community the chance to see, edits that might be more damaging, or edits they might want to hit first before, say, like an extra comma or something like that. But we do work, all around, from everything from helping deploy models that do, say, image recognition for image tagging, things like, say, sock puppet detection. So say if an individual account has some suspicious behavior because they have lots of different accounts, all that kind of stuff is things that we do at the foundation. I think one of the most interesting parts, and something that's probably different than typically where I've worked in tech, is that we are open. We are very, very, very open. Almost everything that we build is open. Almost every single piece of code is open source. Our equivalent to a Jira board, we use a Fabricator, which is an open source tool, but essentially the same with Jira. All of our tickets are open. Our Slack channel, our IRC channel is open. Our emailing lists are open. And you can see everything, all of our documentation is open. All of our analytics are open. Everything we do is out in the open as much as humanly possible. And we do that on purpose. That is a conscious decision, saying, hey, this is a huge effort, a huge community effort that's funded by people around the world. Like my paycheck doesn't come from an investor, doesn't come from a business sale, doesn't come from an enterprise sale. It comes from everybody watching this, going out and giving some money. That's how I'm paid. That's how my team's paid. That's how all of our work is. And for us, it's incredibly important to return to that by providing a means that people can see what you do. We are one of the very few platforms out there that operates at massive scale, Wikipedia scale, top 10 website on the internet scale, and do that in a way that's completely open. So you can see, I haven't done this, but one of these days I'm just going to live stream my day on Twitch, and you can watch me code away on our infrastructure.
That sounds awesome. Awesome. You're relatively new at Wikimedia. You're about 7 months or so in now.
Yeah.
Tell us why you were brought to Wikimedia and a little bit of the history of how machine learning has evolved at Wikimedia.
Sure. So I'll take the first one. The foundation and the community have been using machine learning for almost a decade at the on Wikipedia, and traditionally, it was actually a community effort. So communities have a lot of control over, say, running their own bot on their own community. So you're a member of Dutch Wikipedia, you actually want a bot to take a look at damaging edits or something like that. It's your community. You're allowed to go and make that edit, and we'll host it for you, but you can make it and run your own models because it's your thing. It's a community effort. And for those reasons, there is this long history of people using ML at Wikipedia or on Wikipedia and at the foundation. For us, as things started to scale and things started to get, to the point where people need to work on this full time, that's where, as a lot of times happen at the foundation, that's where the foundation says, hey, we should actually hire a full-time team to work on this and start building out these models. But for us, our big first push in this was called the Oars Models, which are it's a series of around 100 models, but typically in 4 categories around the draft quality, the quality of a draft, how good we think that draft is, the quality of an article, is it that top tier article or is it just a few words on a page? Things like the topic of what's happening with that article, and whether or not we think a particular edit is damaging or not, or unproductive or not. And really, we're pushing those things because the value that they give to the community is really high, and their usage around the community is really high. And it is something that we actually provide. That's what most things we do. We provide free publicly, so there's an API that you can hit if you want, as many times as you want, as I've now learned with the scalability issues. For hitting this API and taking a look at the quality of any article or the topic of any article. But you can see our thinking when doing it. If you go hit, say, the topic model, you can see our thinking of what we think the topic of this thing about. You can see our idea of it. And then you can actually go and just download the model yourself and be like, let me go see how poorly they've done it or how amazing they've done it. I think it's a critical part of it. For me, why did I take the job? Because it's Wikipedia. It's it's the most beloved internet property, which has been a central part of my life for a really, really long time. We just celebrated our 20th year, and wow. It is such an incredible privilege to get up every single day and say, hey, you know what I'm going to work on? I'm going to make Wikipedia ever so slightly better. That's what I'm going to do. That's what my job is. That's what I get paid to do, which I just massively appreciate the chance to do it.
Tell us about your team there.
Sure. So one of the interesting parts of working at the Wikimedia Foundation is that Wikipedia is not known for using cloud hosting solutions. So we don't use AWS. We don't use Google Cloud Compute. We actually host all of our stuff ourselves in our own boxes, in our own rack space. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Part of it is for cost, and part of it is for security, but part of it is a philosophical issue of we are not beholden to any kind of particular vendor for any kind of thing. If we need to move some servers to somewhere else, or we need to move, host Wikipedia outside the country or anything like that, we have the ability to do that. That means, from my perspective, as someone who's ramping up our machine learning, our MLOps infrastructure, that means that we need to start from bare metal. So, this means going out and literally going out and finding which kind of, specking out boxes, specking out servers. Because we're open, I can say that my current issue that I have is that I bought some GPUs, with with the data center ops team that we have. And it turns out the plastic cover of the fans is too big for the chassis. And so like, there was a debate of like, well, could you remove the plastic cover or should we just return it and find a different one with the same chipset but a different form factor? But that's like where we start from, and then we build on top. So I have, you know, 2 folks who are SREs who are really, you know, working on like going from bare metal to like a nice, you know, like say Kubeflow server that I could have, you know, folks work off of. And then on top of that, we have the other part of the team, which is, you know, machine learning engineers who are actually, you know, doing their day-to-day of taking models and putting them into production or training new models or helping build that stuff out. We are, you know, and I think this is probably where a lot of people at this conference are at, is that we are, you know, taking our first steps into moving to that world of having more professionalized ML ops, right? Where the foundation comes from ML is certainly around the idea of, you know, that classical gather the data once, train a model, put it out in production, and then you kind of leave it and you're like, oh, wonderful, wonderful, we've done it. And moving to the fact of like continual retraining, right? Model management, like model artifact management, like having lots and lots of users coming in, like adding the ideas of like, hey, you can write something in a Jupyter notebook and with a push of a button, you can turn it into a model, which you can schedule retraining, and allowing other people on other teams to be able to do that with you. That is, you know, where we're going. And I think that's where lots of people are going, which is why the great interest in ML ops. It does mean that things are, you know, you spend a lot more time on things like, you know, how is Kubernetes configured, or how in the world do you get AMD GPUs to fit into boxes? But, you know, all that is worthwhile, because it means that for us, it means that we're opening the door to a lot more deployment of different models. And, you know, as I said before, like a lot of the models that we deploy are made by the community. They're not made by us. Like we make some models, some other teams at the foundation make models, and then also the community makes models. And we, you know, it is our responsibility to make sure that we can deploy it. Obviously, there's ideas of like how we deploy that safely. Like if someone makes a model that's like a terabyte in size, that's not going to really work in our system. We're going to need to figure out like a way. But being able to handle those kind of submissions, have that broad range of models that you can deploy in various languages and various formats using various packaging is important. And to do it at a Wikipedia scale is definitely an intense challenge.
Yeah, one of the things that that's interesting, when we first spoke and you mentioned that you were all on-prem as opposed to cloud, I did think it was crazy given your scale. But, your description of why you did that, the need to be nimble in terms of being able to move to or not be having a secure foundation for what you're doing in the event that, you know, some government or someone else decided they didn't like the content on Wikipedia. It was all theoretical. And since we had that conversation, we've seen a very public example of what happens when you don't control your fate in that way. You know, I'm not sure there's necessarily a question there, but
no, I think you know, it's demonstrative of why it's valuable, right? When we talked about it, it was, you know, theoretical, and I still, in a lot of cases, like, you know, it has been non-theoretical previously in the past. Like we are a global organization moving a global movement forward. That's how we operate. And obviously, you know, servers need to be somewhere. You need to be able to serve it. There's lots of reasons to have it in a particular place. But certainly there are advantages to not being beholden to a particular vendor, and you're locked into that vendor. And if you want to move from that vendor, you're going to need to like have, you know, 20,000 hours of work to like drag yourself out and migrate yourself over. Like we don't have that problem. I mean, we pay cost for that, right? Like, yeah, we are starting from bare metal, and I'm arguing about the plastic fan that doesn't seem to fit into the chassis. But it is, you know, to me, I find it, as someone who has used Wikipedia but is just joining the foundation recently, I appreciate the time and energy that's spent to give us that independence, because that means that when people come and edit and visit the site and read stuff and try to collaborate on there and try to, you know, reach some semblance of truth through the talk pages, that part of it is echoed in everything we do, right down from the editors all the way down to like deep in the stack where I am, where we're trying to be open, we're trying to be available, we're trying to be independent. I think that's, probably, if I use the startup word, I would call that our moat, that like we have, that's the thing that we can provide that is incredibly valuable. And I think that's why people keep coming back to the site. And I think that's why it's lasted so long.
Awesome. You've mentioned Oars as one of the main models that or family of models that you and your team work on. Those are NLP oriented models. No surprise that NLP is a big part of what you do.
Right. Yeah, it comes up.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, are all the models you work on NLP oriented, or what's the full scope of the different types of models that you're working with?
Yeah, not all of them are NLP. We're doing some work on image recognition, which is being done somewhere else in the foundation that doesn't, which is more computer vision. There's also ones that are just more structured data inputs. I will say NLP is a huge bucket of what we do, simply because we have a massive corpus and we're really interested in the quality of that corpus, and we're really interested in how that corpus is being used and how it's changing over time. And so we tend to fall back into that that area to grab that stuff. It's something that, of course is true, and Wikipedia Commons, which is where we have, all the actual images and stuff, is very large. I've now discovered with I think like 3 billion objects or something in it. But for us, the very standard place we're working is definitely in text, trying to understand it, trying to understand how people are changing it.
So you came on board at the foundation about 7 months ago with the kind of mandate to professionalize the way you're doing machine learning, at least from an operationalization production perspective. You're 7 months in. How far have you gotten? And maybe more importantly, what was the approach or the path you took, or the way you started thinking about that got you to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. So definitely the first thing I did is just try to learn, because, as you can imagine, Wikipedia, not just English Wikipedia, global Wikipedia, and on all the affiliated projects is huge. And it means that the learning curve around it is massive. And I think it takes, I think you should walk in with a large amount of humility that people have been working on this for a long time. People have been thinking about this for a long time. You're not the first person to think about disinformation at Wikipedia, or the first person to think about fake edits at Wikipedia. There's 100, there's 100 articles about it, academic journal articles and everything else. So I started with just trying to learn. I started just by talking to people, talking to members of the community, talking to people internally, how in the world all this stuff was happening. Trying to figure out who was using it, all that kind of stuff. And then we dove into the technical review, what is the infrastructure that we have? What are the limitations of it? And where do we want to go from there? And that was the moment where, because I was joining, but because everything was open, I could see the need for more MLOps. I could see that value even when I was just, simply applying. And so, we moved and we were looking around for tooling to improve the MLOps part. And definitely, we looked at various tools. Obviously, we focused on open source tools because that's just, that's how we do things. And so for us, as the foundation itself moves to more and more using Kubernetes for all the advantages of scale and that kind of stuff, Kubeflow actually had a few features that were super valuable to us. One, just the UI is really, a wonderful place to have other folks join and work on stuff. So you get Jupyter notebooks, you get the ability to schedule stuff. That means we can have people on our research team or machine learning folks who are less full stack with the infrastructure, can come in, can actually work there and have a full and productive experience. But also having the power of a Kubernetes cluster is so important to us, because we can't brute force our scalability, right? We are,
what does that mean?
So it rounds we can't just dump a bunch of money on like say like a cloud hosted solution and then we have enough scalability. In fact, for us, like it takes a while for us to purchase new boxes. We have to physically literally shipping boxes filled with servers arrive at the data center, and then someone has to come out and
rack them and stack them.
put them in and then wire everything and all that kind of stuff. And so like we can't just like upgrade our AWS instance or something like that. And that part of it means that we need to be very careful about the spikiness of training. So if someone's really gonna, hammer or, ask for ask for a prediction on every single thing, or say train a model like 20 models at a time and then it goes down, that spikiness is handled really well on things like Kubernetes, which means that we could have less hardware to start out with, which is really very valuable from my perspective as the person running the budget and trying to make everything round out. I have just super appreciated the MLOps community around Kubeflow and Kubernetes. I think it means that we as a small team can come into this and always find additional resources, always find someone to talk to, always find someone to ask questions for. Which is probably one of the most valuable things that I find, because it is something that I am able to do regularly, and with really light touch, I can just reach out to someone and say, hey, how does this work? Does this match this thing? And they'll say, yeah, it works fine. And I could move on. Where there are other tools out there that have smaller communities, and I think they're really good tools, but it does mean that you're sort of a little bit more on your own to try to figure out if something breaks. You file a ticket and then nobody ever responds for 4 months, and then you're like, ruh-roh.
So where have you kind of prioritized your efforts in terms of taking a workflow and getting it into Kubeflow? Or is there a particular pipeline or model or system that you focused on first? Or are you kind of thinking about it as a broad utility and making it accessible to everyone at the same time?
No, so we, for us, our first steps were to take one model that was made by another team and 3 models that were made by our team and try to get it in production. That's the baseline of how, how do you think about an MVP internally? And how do you put that thing out there in a world that's both scalable, but also you have a little bit more control over how things work? And so for us, it was some models that we knew really well, and then one model that we didn't know so well, but it meant that we'd have to, we're forcing ourselves to coordinate more with other teams. I think, I wouldn't do it another way if I could go back and do it again. I think there's just a large amount of value in having a model that you really, really know. So you have to worry less about the model. You can worry about the servers, because the thing about it is there's both a technical and social side to this, in the sense where, we're coming in and saying, hey, we're changing the infrastructure, we're buying hardware, we're setting up Kubernetes clusters, and we're, all the work that's around that, there's a lot of work around that. And then also we're saying to other teams and members of the community, hey, this is a different place. We're gonna have a different workflow with this. You have to do things in a different way. You have to think about things in a different way, because, we're gonna need to Dockerize everything and how all that works. That part of it is definitely a huge amount of work. And I didn't want to jump in with something that was a very, very, very difficult model, and then also doing a very, very new infrastructure and a very, very new workflow for everyone. So once we, once those are running, it's much easier for us to say, hey, okay, great. Now let's try to do the next model. Now let's try to expand to sort of say things that require more and more tensor calculations or something like that, where we'd have to have say more GPUs or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. And so did you find that the model that you didn't know was a lot more difficult to get up and running? How did that go?
I mean, I'll say this. I think the migration of things to Kubeflow, at least in our experience, with these initial first steps in it, has been really nice. I have appreciated it a lot how, while there are lots of difficulties in there, I never felt like there wasn't a path forward. I never felt like there was like some key feature. In fact, the opposite has tended to be true, where I haven't thought of something and then there would be some feature. So for example, in Kubeflow, they have the pre-processing and post-processing transformers, which is that, say, for example, in our case, someone can submit an edit number to the API, like that's actually what they're submitting to the API. We'll actually take that edit number, go grab the text of that edit, then process it as features, and then submit it to the model. That kind of pre-processing. I didn't really think about that as much as I probably should have. And then I saw that feature and I was like, oh, that's neat. And then afterwards, it was our research team. It was like, we need this exact feature. And I was like, oh yeah, that's that. Clearly they've thought about this before. But that's the huge advantage of these open source projects, is that there's other people who have run into this problem before, other people who have thought about this before and have, sat down like with a late night with coffee and like fixed it. And then you come along later and just reap all the benefits from it. So I have appreciated that a huge percent. I think it's probably one of the things that I value the most about using an open source tool for this kind of thing, which is, it just otherwise would be considered like a big enterprise sale with 4 or 5 consultants. Instead, it's just like a small team, like reading the docs and trying to figure out how stuff works. That part of it, it's completely like incalculable how valuable that has been for us.
Yeah, I think also maybe coming in, within the past 7 months to a year, you've missed some of the sharp edges that used to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely, and that was why when we were looking for open source projects, like I am both as an individual really interested in the cutting, bleeding edge of this stuff, but also as someone who's responsible for making this happen, I tend to be much more conservative around, how we, like what tools we use, because I don't want to be cutting myself on that, like that jagged edge that no one's fixed. I want to come in where it's a little bit better, and it is nice to see these MLOps tools be more rounded and have more of those like rounded feature sets, which as we both know was not the case. Even just a few years ago, it definitely wasn't the case, and we were all sort of like hacking together our own solutions, which I think is the classic one where you're, like adding metadata about the models to the like model file name. Like that's how you're storing the model artifacts. But to me, I think more and more from organizations, it is not about whether or not machine learning is valuable or whether or not, a model can be useful. It's more about how you get that model out there, right? How do you do that in a way that isn't just like a one-off, that isn't just some like hacky solution that works that one time, but rather how you do this in a regular way, how you do this in a way that you're monitoring it, you're looking at model drift, you're looking at performance drift, you're seeing how well those things do over time, and you're doing minor adjustments or even A/B testing, and you're doing all that, which just requires like even one model suddenly becomes thousands of models that have been trained over various days or for various times, and all the artifacts behind how to manage all that kind of stuff. That to me is becoming, the most difficult problem, and the one where you can have the larger lift. Where I think probably, when me and you, Sam, started this, I think it was a little bit more like, hey, I have trained a model, and all of a sudden, like, it's like, wow, this is amazing. Like any model is amazing, right? Like any model is adding like huge amount of value and huge amount of lift to the organization. And now I think those low-hanging fruits are gone, and now it's more like, okay, how do we do this on the regular? How do we like productize this in a way, at least internally, where we can be constantly putting models out there, and we can treat models less as like a crystal chandelier that we've spent so much time training on, and more as just sort of like a wrench, or I guess maybe a disposable coffee cup that you like use, and then when you find a better coffee cup, you sort of throw away the old one. And thinking about it in those terms, that's definitely where it feels like we're going. That's definitely where I've been moving things, and that's where MLOps just becomes significantly more useful than I think I assumed it would be maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, where, you know, it was like, we've made it random for us. All of a sudden, you're not randomly emailing people, you're emailing people who you think are you know, going to click the link or something like that. I think those days, that both exists, but it's also, you know, part of that is like how to do that as like at scale and manage that and having a lot more control over that.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about the impact of Kubeflow and the system that you're building on training and how it helps you avoid the spikiness. You also just alluded to some of the impact on serving. Can you talk a little bit more about what you've done on the serving side? And is there one or the other of those that is more impactful for you, at least at this point?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So how the infrastructure of at least this part of Wikimedia's infrastructure is that we have a data lake, which is where we store, you know, like basically all of our data. And that part of it is on its own private virtual VLAN. So it's behind a firewall. You can't, you know, you can't actually get access to it unless you're, right now, you have to be physically in the same data center as it to get access to it. And that's where, you know, the training, you know, that like in our plan, that's where the training is going to happen. But the first thing we did was actually not work on the training part, because you could train models elsewhere. You could train models on your laptop. We don't really do that because the models are big, but we have like boxes, we call them stat boxes, which are big, beefy individual boxes that researchers and my team can log into and like train an individual model on there. For me coming in, the issue was not the ability of folks to train models, because we had the staff who had the experience in it. We had the staff who had the, you know, the computers to be able to do it. We even had all the data that we needed to do it. The blocker was that there wasn't a way to deploy models in a way that wasn't a one-off boutique solution. And so the first thing we actually have been working on is actually Kubernetes with KF serving standalone on top of it. So we're not even using, you know, all the features that you think of with Kubeflow with this particular cluster. We're just taking that Kubeflow serving part of it and just taking the standalone version and then putting it on top of Kubernetes. And there are so many advantages to this. One, just from a stakeholder side, it means that ourselves and the community and other people can actually go and deploy models and be unblocked from that particular thing. I more and more have appreciated that since we're a small team, having that standalone feature and getting that up means that our serving architecture is much more simpler, which means that our SLA with the SREs and the SREs on my team and the SREs elsewhere in the foundation can actually, you know, be a lot more maintainable, right? We don't, it's not a training cluster is a very finicky device. There's lots, you know, I've got to connect the data lake. How do you make the feature store? Like, how do you store the artifacts? Like, there's lots of users logging in and training stuff, and it's really, you know, that kind of stuff. Where with separating out the serving part of it and putting that somewhere else means that we can have a very, you know, I've been calling it like a fortified bunker with like an API endpoint, which is, you know, like this thing will run, this thing won't go down, will be, you know, it'll be stable. That part of it has been really valuable. And then, you know, the other part of it, which is the training part, which is, you know, messy and it's going to take a lot more, you know, difficulty and time and stakeholder engagement to figure out like all the different parts of that.
It was getting KF serving on Kubernetes outside of the context of Kubeflow going. Was that a custom, difficult to do thing, or was that pretty easy to get up?
I mean, it's been fine so far. I think actually the biggest problem for us is that we mostly only use open source tools, which means that we don't actually use NVIDIA GPUs. We use AMD because CUDA is not open source, like CUDA is proprietary. So we use a different tooling around that. And that has meant that there's actually not a lot of documentation. There's not a lot of people who have tried to do this. And it is possible. We're very certain it's possible. But that part of it of trying to figure out how to do that exactly is something where, you know, I was talking about the value of having an open source community around a particular project. Mm-hmm. This is the moment that we're sort of out of that community, like we're out of that community's knowledge base and we're sort of building our own knowledge base off to the corner. I'm confident we'll crack it, but I definitely think the part of it of trying to use trying to use GPUs that like are less popular for this particular thing and aren't sort of the one that like is really hyped right now is definitely part of it that I think my team has worked a lot at. I think there's great value in it. I'm super pleased that we're working on it, but it is definitely one of the more challenging things. Kubeflow itself, has been great. I think now you're starting to see a lot of documentation, books coming out about Kubeflow and that kind of stuff. And that's as a director at a technology organization, I appreciate when I see that kind of stuff, because I feel like that's sort of the heuristic for where the bar is for how mature something is. If there's a few books out on it, you can be like, okay, we're probably at the maturity level that I can adopt this tool without some like major disaster where it's like they stop working on it in a year or something like that, and then I'm left to develop it on my own.
Was it difficult to get your research community up and running with Docker and the types of tools you're using on the serving side? It sounds like you went from a kind of a white glove, give us your model and we'll baby it into production, to something that's a little bit more of a factory. Right. That often requires putting a lot more burden, the burden of self-service onto those researchers. How has that part of the process been?
Yeah, that was actually the reason that my team was created, and one of the reasons that I was hired was to turn that from needing to have, say, researchers be like essentially like forcing them to be full stack in order to like put a model out there, mm-hmm. or forcing them to sort of try to find someone to like put their model out, and instead say, hey, like we're here to help you. Like I think of our team as a service team, right? Like we both think of like how we can do machine learning better and how we can make models, but we're also serving, the community and other people at the organization who say, they can come to us and say, hey, I have this Jupyter notebook. Like our role is to have the staffing and have the resources to say, hey, we'll we're here to help you with it. It's not it is not against our annual plan or our priorities to stop and help you. That's actually what we're here to do. And which means that, say the research team can focus on the really difficult problems that they should be focused on. These are not simple models. These are not simple problems. There's a lot of ethical and social issues, and then you add the idea that it's global, and there's a lot of like internationalization and how you deal with different languages. These are not simple things, but coming in, one of the things that I saw very quickly is the way that I could provide a lot of value and my team could provide a lot of value is being the place where someone could work on a difficult model elsewhere, or someone in the community could work at a difficult model, and we would be able to put it out for them. We'll maintain it, we'll monitor it, we'll deploy it. Just like, give us something and we'll work with you to get it out there. And so you can focus on those real hard problems of training, and we'll focus on the hard parts of training our own models, but we'll also help you out and put that out there. I think that specialization is something that you see more and more. Like, I don't know how many years ago now, it feels like 20 years ago, but it's probably like 7 years ago where everyone was a data scientist, or 6 years ago where everyone was a data scientist. And then you saw this explosion where it's like, actually this field is too big for that, right? You have to people who both do analytics or analytics engineering, or like machine learning research, machine learning engineering, like you add data engineering in there and that like specialization. And I feel like ML ops is something that's pulling out in that same way, where it says, hey, if you want to put out these models at scale, if you want to do that continual retraining with, gathering new data all the time and monitor those and everything like that, you need to have some kind of, internal resources for how to maintain that and monitor that. And I'm definitely not the only person to think of this. This is definitely not the first idea, because there is quite a few, pretty amazing startups that are coming out to do that exact same thing, to actually be that resource, so you can focus on the difficulties of, say, predicting customer churn or predicting disinformation. And then, there's another team out there who can, who specializes in, okay, no, you just give us a thing and we'll be out there and actually put that out there for you and make sure it runs well. We do both, but it is like, there is a split of our knowledge on our team to try to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and one that comes up constantly at this conference, mostly because I ask about it constantly. And every organization seems to have found their own place in the spectrum of, do we do we teach everyone how to use these new tools, or do we, we become the level of abstraction and protect them from all the complexity of these new tools? It sounds like you're on that latter part of the spectrum and trying to, bring us your models and we shall make them scale.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is a classic debate in a lot of areas of data science, right? You have the idea of like self-serve analytics versus like don't self-serve any analytics. And like I said, I tend to fall on the idea that I would like the folks who are, say, trying to do a very, very difficult machine learning problem and are trying to figure out, how to understand disinformation across multiple languages with very complex actors who are using very elaborate techniques to like add disinformation to the platform, that those people can focus on that issue rather than getting that model out, or rather than, and to me, it means that they can focus more on that kind of stuff, and I can focus more on getting the models out. That doesn't mean we don't train models. We train our own models, and we're working that area. But being able to allow a team of incredibly smart and dedicated researchers focus on the thing that they know, and not forcing them to become their own like mini data engineer / SRE in order to get something done is valuable. I find a lot of value in that. I think if the organization was even smaller than it was, because we are a pretty small organization for the scale of which the foundation operates, if we were like even smaller, I think I would probably try to outsource that to say a third-party vendor to do that deployment stuff, and then focus my folks on what they know. Like that level of domain knowledge is useful, right? Like our folks on the research team and the folks who do ML on my team know Wikipedia like the back of their hand, all the little nuances, all the little like side things, all the history behind that one time that person did that one thing. They know all of that. And so allowing them to really shine in that area and focus their attention in that area, rather than like the nuts and bolts of like, this is the Docker image you need to use to wrap around your Kubernetes or your KF serving pipeline in order to like train it, is, I find value in it. Someone could argue me off that point, but I feel I haven't seen that argument yet.
Awesome. I want to remind folks, and apologize for not doing it earlier, to be sure to, if you're watching via the homepage on the platform, be sure to click through to the stream so you see the chat and can ask questions. And I'll be taking some additional questions and working them into the conversation now. One interesting question from Albin is going back to this kind of spectrum of various use cases at the foundation. Are you using it to predict when to show the donation prompts and how much to ask for?
No. So, I mean, one of the interesting things about working at the foundation is that one, the donations are all scheduled. The banner happens like the same time every single year. And there is a team that works on that. I have, for us at the foundation, like if you think about like what are the daily conversations that my team are having, the fundraising part is super important because it's how we fund everything. But the daily conversations my team are having are around like, how do we do something ethically? How do we like find disinformation on the platform? How do we deploy a model to add tagging? How do we deploy a model that like is a better topic model than we currently have? Like those are the conversations that I'm having. And I have really appreciated joining the organization that on the outside has a very, very high reputation for like that neutrality, for that trying to be the good actor in the world of free information, and then joining and then realizing it's the exact same thing on the inside. I think I was joking at one point that I've never actually heard the word profit or sale like ever said, which is the first time in a long time I've never actually heard that word being said in a meeting. Like we are about trying to make Wikipedia better. That's what we are focused on. But I do appreciate that banner a lot more now that my salary's paid from it. That's definitely true.
That's awesome. I don't know if Shrikar is asking for an answer to this question or not, but it is an interesting idea. Any plans on starting your own cloud service?
So we actually do have our own cloud service. It is called Cloud VPS. It is a publicly available, basically like a AWS EC2 instance for people to use.
Really?
And it's actually where most of the bots, or a lot of the bots who are on Wikipedia, are hosted. So you can sign up and get your own instance, and we have a team that manages it, and you can run your own thing. So we do have a cloud-hosted instance. We also have other things like Pause, which is a one-button suite for creating a Jupyter, like a hosted Jupyter notebook that actually connects to our data. So you can jump on there, push one button, you get a Jupyter notebook, and you can dive into Wikipedia's data. There are a lot of services that the foundation provides that I think are more unknown than one would think. But when you dive in there, you actually see that there's a lot of things that the foundation does to sort of keep Wikipedia running along the veins of helping the community make stuff, which is definitely where Cloud VPS is used a lot.
Digging deeper into that area, within large enterprises, you hear the term citizen data science thrown around. Well, in enterprises and outside, kind of connoting this idea that, we want to provide tools to allow folks to understand and use data better. And you're doing that on a huge scale with the community. Talk about some of the implications of the community to what you're doing with serving up models and allowing them to run models against your data. Yeah.
So for us, we want to provide as much data as possible without affecting privacy. That's sort of the name of the game. So we throw out a lot of, or don't collect a lot of product analytics data, because it is not in our interest to hold it. We want this to be a platform where people can edit and edit anonymously or pseudonymously, and make it that open place. So we are, we throw out a lot of data or don't collect it, but there is a lot of data in there around like all the content and some of the usage and stuff like that. And along those lines, for us, we want to get that in front of the community. We want people to use it. Like my goal, and sort of my like gold standard for how we do this, is say folks of Dutch, I'm going to keep on using Dutch Wikipedia here. Folks in the Dutch Wikipedia community actually gather their own training data for something, and say for an Oars model, then either them or we will train a model using that training data and then serve it back to them in a way that's useful to them. That is our gold standard. So the community is both creating its own training data, which we then serve a model that provides value to them. That is like where we've started to take steps, and it's where like I think the best Oars models use that approach, but not all of them. And part of my role of sort of professionalizing and really upping this ML ops part of it, and part of my strategy around it, is to get to a place where we're doing that more and more and more, where it is not my team that's sitting down and saying, hey, this is what we think is best for the Swahili Wikipedia community. It's in fact that community who's saying, this is actually what we want. Like, can you help us with this? Can you give us the training data? Can you train the model? Can you talk with us about it? Like whatever you want. Like, that's what we're here to do. We're here to support those communities and help them grow and help them have a better UI and help them have a better experience. And trying to impose our own sort of like our own assumptions for how things go, our own biases of what we think is not helpful, and is something that I think it's important for us as like a global organization to avoid. So we are big on community involvement. We're definitely big on making sure that folks are contributing, because this is actually Wikipedia after all. At the end of the day, this is Wikipedia.
Awesome. Great question from Jeremy about the system architecture that you use for scoring all edits. Is it streaming, batch?
Yeah, so we do batch, and so what we'll actually do is we'll do a mix, but we do have an event stream that you can actually see and tag, and we do a lot of pre-caching of that stuff, because we will actually create a prediction on every single edit of which of a Wikipedia community that we're serving, and we'll store that away, because we have learned over time that folks will come in and say, hey, I want the quality of the quality score for every single Wikipedia article, and then if they were just hitting the API endpoint, like my servers would be like burning red hot, and there'd be like a fire at the data center or something like that. And so pre-caching that stuff is super critical. For me, like moving forward, I definitely prefer like on the training side to do batch to start, because I think there's so much value in streaming for particular use cases that online learning can be incredibly valuable for particular cases, but it comes with a lot of cost and complexity. And I am wary about jumping that hurdle until we need to, until I see the really advantage to it. It's something that like these days it's like, oh no, we could do online learning if we, just immediate. But the infrastructure you need to do that really has to be justified with what you're going to get out of it. And there's definitely cases where that's true. I don't think it's true with us yet. I think in the future it could be, but I think events-based systems and that kind of stuff are definitely starting to take over. And so following that notion of having something more of like an online approach and then like pulling out that streaming approach is something that could be valuable.
Where do you characterize where you are in the journey and kind of projecting out to the next 7 months? Where do you want to be?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, like we are right at the start, right? Like we are, for us, we have an 18-month roadmap, which is not public now, but it will be public because everything we do is public. And so you'll be able to see what we plan to build in the 18-month. And for us, there's big parts of it. It's trying to make sure that we can deploy models stably, any model. Having that training infrastructure that people can use, having some kind of way for getting to get, say, continual training data, rather than like batch training from like some like crowdsourced approach, instead to have something that's more of like a trickle of data, say 0.5% of users receive a prompt of them asking for, like whether or not this edit was productive or not, like creating a little stream of data from that, which we add to our feature store. Then moving on and say, one of the things we want to build is like an ML sandbox where so you can say, hey, what are the models that are being served to Dutch Wikipedia? And like, can I play with it? Like, can I actually go and like submit an edit ID and see everything, because we're open, everything that they've thought about this, every little thing that possibly the model could spit out, and a link to where I could download the model and who put the last GitHub, like edit in there and all that kind of stuff. Having that out there for folks and having that playground, and then a spot for them to say, hey, I put in this prediction and it's wrong, right? Like I want that. We want our big advantage is that folks contribute to us. That's like the people come and like make edits and have opinions and have thoughts, and that's something that's really, really, really important. And I would like to take advantage of that more, where the models that we put out are from the community, both either created by the community or trained by the community or both. That is, something that's sort of central to the foundation's philosophy on all this stuff, and something that I definitely want to continue.
You mentioned feature store. What are you doing in terms of feature store?
Well, that's the issue. We don't have a feature store yet. This is our next. This is on our roadmap right now. Yeah, and it's something where we have come in and like, you can see folks who work on the, say, research side, or my folks actually have to do quite a bit of work to like pull those features out. And we have sort of like a proto version of a feature store, but that's an area that I would really love to develop more in a stronger solution for. And that requires coordination with like the great folks on the data engineering team and try to work that out. But there is a lot of value in allowing, and this goes back to my point before, allowing folks who are focusing on modeling to focus on modeling, right? Not focus on like pre-processing the data if they don't need to. I think they'll always have to pre-process a little bit, but like don't have to pre-process from scratch, don't have to understand how, the nuances of the model serving architecture, right? Really letting them not be full stack, which I know, full stack is in the vogue every few years, but I really value specialization, particularly around folks who are like tackling really, really difficult challenges. I want them to have models they can take off the shelf and compare their current model to. I want them to have, say a historical notion of how models have behaved over time, and they can use that to inform your future things. I want them to grab features off the shelf. I want them to like have pre-trained data that they can work on. All that kind of stuff is very valuable, and is something where if you think of yourself as like a service-focused ML team, it becomes important both to service your own folks who are training models and service other teams who are you want them to focus on what they know best.
Awesome. You mentioned that you publish that the foundation historically publishes open sources. Do you envision publishing open source in this domain?
Oh yeah, no. We hopefully every single thing we do will be open source. The foundation's actually almost all open source, except for say like HR and donations and like a few things like that. But basically everything's out in the open that you can go take a look at. For us, there'll be a few models. I think very rarely we'll have models that we we won't publish for folks because there'll be models around disinformation where you don't want to have the bad actor who can like just look at the model and then like develop a workaround and serve it back to you. But everything else will be out. You can take the model, just like with the Oars, you could download the Oars models, you can download all of our training data, you can download all of our analytics. Right now you have full access to everything. And to me, part of being an ethical ML organization is that transparency. We are not trying to pull one over on you. We are telling you exactly what we're doing with what we're doing with it. And if you want to, you can take it all and do it yourself and then come back to us and say, hey, I've done it better. Do it this way. And we'll say, awesome, that's work that we don't need to do. But it is central that the work that we do should be as transparent as possible. And frankly, it's one of the most fun things about working at the foundation is that you can be open. I can talk about the the nitty-gritty details of our infrastructure and the problems that we have and the solutions that we have. And that is a great experience coming from places that are like you want to keep your cards close to your chest and you don't want to say everything that you're working on. And you don't want to say that you're having a problem with that. We have no problem with saying what we did great and saying what we did poorly and what we're doing to fix. I think it's one of the reasons that I like working here.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. And on that last note, being so open about what you're up to, it's great fun to chat with you.
Yeah, absolutely.